When it comes to collecting anything in life, there's always stuff that's overrated, and video games definitely have their fair share of overrated categories, whether it's Pokemon games or the newest Call of Duty. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to chat about two retro systems that many deem to be overrated. Let's talk about it. The first one is a retro console that has gotten a lot of attention in the past 5 years, and that is the GameCube. Now originally when it released, it was definitely underrated, especially when it came to the sales, but as of lately the console has received a lot of praise and it definitely deserves some of that, but I can't help but feel that a lot of it is purely driven by nostalgia. People tend to forget that the GameCube released in the same time period as the PS2 and Xbox original, and although the Xbox was extremely powerful, it definitely didn't speak to the younger audiences as much as Nintendo, but the PS2 on the other hand spoke to everyone. Most of the games you can find on the GameCube can also be found on the PS2, and while yes, the GameCube has a lot of great console exclusives, so does the PS2, and as a matter of fact, the PS2 has just under 3 times the amount of games in its library compared to the GameCube. So then why do people opt for the GameCube nowadays when it has a smaller library? Well, mainly because of the notable games on the system such as Smash Bros. Melee, F-Zero, and Metroid Prime. These are all really good games, but that being said, those are only a few releases amongst its 600 plus library of games, which makes you think, are the other hundreds of games worth checking out? And well, sorta. And the reason I'm saying this is because although the GameCube has some great games like Resident Evil 4, Beautiful Joe, and Tony Hawk Pro Skater, so does the PS2, and actually the PS2 has most of the same games as the GameCube. And this is why I tend to think the GameCube is kinda overrated, because you can grab the same game on the PS2 for a fraction of the cost. On top of that, the hardware for a PS2 is much cheaper, and you can find memory cards for $2 to $3 locally. So it seems that while the GameCube wasn't a success during its release, nowadays people have come to appreciate its solid first-party lineup of games, but its lack of third-party support and insanely high pricing nowadays makes me feel the GameCube has become a little overrated and not worthwhile for new buyers, especially when considering how cheap Xbox and PS2 games are at the moment. You'd be hard-pressed to find any good GameCube title for $5 to $10 as of 2023. And so those are my thoughts on GameCube, but I still want to chat about one more console that many have been deeming as overrated, and that's the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. This sits alongside the GameCube's high pricing when it comes to average game costs and can be extremely expensive to collect for. But is it overrated? Well, some people argue that it is, and due to its high pricing, many people aren't interested in buying games for it, but I would disagree with the console being deemed as overrated, and I'm going to tell you why. The SNES, unlike the GameCube, was a monumental step forward when it came to 16-bit entertainment. It sold extremely well and brought forward a ton of third-party support, and even though I don't really play many RPGs, I can really appreciate the level of detail put into the pixel art for these games. And speaking of pixel art, when it came to playing the Castlevania titles on the original NES and then moving over to the Super Nintendo, it was a monumental upgrade in terms of visuals and frame rate. On top of that, there were so many amazing third-party releases compared to the GameCube and other succeeding consoles. So while the SNES may have some extremely high prices, it has a really solid library to choose from, and yes, you might be paying $30 to $40 for a loose game, but you can be assured it's usually a very good game. Whereas, well, the GameCube, it can't really guarantee that. But there is one last thing we haven't talked about when it comes to the SNES, and that's the competition at the time, which was the Sega Genesis. Both consoles sold almost equally, and the Genesis had a lot of really good games, especially if you enjoyed shooters, sports titles, and games that required fast frame rates. It's no surprise then that the Genesis was much more popular with adults, while the SNES sold predominantly to younger generations. So then it makes sense that these younger generations have now grown up and they've chosen to favor the SNES instead of the Sega Genesis, thus explaining why the prices are so much higher on the Super Nintendo. So to conclude, the SNES is a very expensive console but not overrated, while the GameCube on the other hand can be a little overrated compared to the PS2 and Xbox. The SNES definitely holds its own and defined many genres forever, and for that reason I understand why the console is so collectible, but who really knows? Those are just my thoughts and opinions, and I'd like to hear what other people say down in the comments below. And with that said, I just want to say a massive thank you for watching until the very end. Please subscribe as it really helps the channel, and I hope you have an amazing day. Bye.